Hello and welcome to the Art Class Curator podcast. I am Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator and the Curated Connections Library. We're here to talk about teaching art with purpose and inspiration, from the daily delights of creativity to the messy mishaps that come with being a teacher. Whether you're driving home from school or cleaning up your classroom for the 15th time today, take a second, take a deep breath, relax those shoulders, and let's get started. Hi everybody, it's Cindy Ingram from Art Class Curator, and welcome back to the Art Class Curator podcast. Today I have a guest for you, and her name is Barbara Lardner, and she is an expert at grant writing for the classroom. She presents at NAEA frequently about how to get grants for your classroom, and today we're going to talk especially about how to write a great grant proposal. So before we get into the interview, I just want to quickly introduce Barbara. She is an art teacher who works in an urban core district in Rhode Island, and she has had the opportunity to teach in multiple grade levels, elementary, middle, and high school. And she's a graduate of Providence College and the University of Tennessee with degrees in art education and administration. Let's dive right into our conversation. I'm so excited to welcome Barbara Lardner to the podcast. Welcome, Barbara.
Welcome, Cindy. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome.
I'm so familiar with your website, and I really appreciate you having me here, and I really admire what you do with your website. So it's great to be here.
Thank you so much. So before we get started, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about you and your background and experiences?
Well, let me start out I've always loved art. From a young age, I have 2 degrees in art education, and I have been an art teacher for over 25 years. I've taught pre-K, elementary, middle school, high school. So I have a lot of background in art education, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. So, it's wonderful to be able to share what I've learned with your listeners because it may help them too.
Wonderful. Do you have a favorite grade?
I like elementary. Elementary is my favorite. And I like the younger ones, maybe 2nd, 3rd grade. That's my favorite because they're still excited about learning art. Sometimes when they get to the older grades, they get kind of blasé about it. They're, too cool for it. So
yeah. And you teach elementary now?
Now I teach elementary, pre-K through 5.
Awesome. So I understand that you are kind of a whiz at getting grants for your classroom. Can you share some of the grants that you've received?
Sure. Well, first I'll start off with the kind of glamorous type of grants that I've gotten. I actually got a grant from a museum, and I was able to go to Paris and study art history at the Musée d'Orsay. So that was really exciting. So those are some of the more glamorous things you can get with grant money. But then I've had grants for projects in my classroom. I've gotten grants for doing circuits and LED lights. I've gotten grants for explosion books, and so there's all different types of grants. I even got a grant where I got to go to get my master's degree at the University of Tennessee. So,
that's wonderful.
There's a lot of different types of grants that you can get. So
I know that everybody paused it and went to go look to find where they find the trip to Paris one. Is that a particular grant, or was it just you wrote a grant because you wanted that experience, or was it one that was offering that?
I wanted to go to Paris to see artwork, and I was looking up organizations and how I could get to somehow be able to go and go to Paris. And I found this organization, and then I found that there was a museum associated with the organization, and they would supplement your trip and pay the tuition. So that was just kind of happenstance. So
that's wonderful. Yeah, we do we did before COVID, and we are doing it again next summer, but a trip every year with Art Class Curator. And I know last year we had a couple that were getting their trip funded through grants, and that was really exciting.
Yeah.
They didn't, no one got to go last year, but that's awesome. So it sounds like you can get grants for just individual projects versus and really large things. So where do you find out about these sort of grant opportunities?
Well, let me go back to the first thing you said. There are different types of grants. You can get grants that are for classroom enrichment, and that's where you can get materials for your classroom or technology for your classroom, something for your students in your classroom. And then there are teacher development projects, and that was my trip to Paris, and that's to make you a better teacher, to help improve your knowledge base or develop your pedagogical skills. But for somebody just starting out trying to find a grant, I think you'd be better off to just start local, start looking throughout your state to find a grant, because those would be a smaller grant, and it would be simpler for you to fill out the application and go through the process, and that way you can develop your skills. And then maybe down the road, after you've gotten some smaller grants, and you can go out and try to get more national grants or grants that offer a lot more money. So I would start local. And I live in Rhode Island, so it's a small state, and there's 2 family foundations that are geared toward education for you to apply for grants. So if you live in a bigger state, there might be more available small family foundations where you could get grants. So I would start local and look around.
Yeah, I like that because it probably gives you the experience writing, gives you the experience filling out the applications, the experience doing the assessments and all the paperwork that is involved. And so that you're really more prepared for those bigger opportunities.
Yeah, and the smaller ones, you're more likely to get rewarded the grant. I mean, if you're starting off with a big grant, you're going to have more competition, and you don't have as much practice in writing the grants, and you might be turned down, because I've been turned down for big grants too. But and if you're just starting off, it's going to be like, oh gosh, well, maybe I just don't have it to get a grant. So start smaller, and you have more of a chance to get the grant. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, that's good advice. So looking, where would they find, a local foundation? I mean, is it just a matter of just very targeted Google searching, or are there databases out there for grants?
Gosh, I don't know. There could be databases out there. I have just looking local, just Google searches, and 2 of the family foundations in my state, they actually reach out to teachers too. And I've had museum grants. There's some local museums, and they've actually reached out to teachers. So because they are education based, so it makes it worthwhile for them to reach out to teachers. But other ones, I have done Google searches and found grants that way. But I can give you a list of some grant foundations that
Awesome.
you can give to your listeners.
Yeah, we'll put those in the show notes of this episode. So if you're listening, you can check that out. But I also think maybe checking your state art association and NAEA, I bet they have stuff in there too. So let's talk about writing your grant proposal. So once you figured out your grant, you know what you're going to apply for. What's the process?
Okay, I'll start you out with the process. So first of all, it's going to sound obvious, but you want to read the grant first, because you want to determine what their purpose is, and you want to find out what it is, the type of projects that they fund, because you want to align your proposal with their purpose. Because if say that you want to get a grant that's environmental based, environmental art, and they don't support those, they're more into technology, it's not going to make any sense to apply for that grant. So you want to make sure that it's something that they're going to fund, something that you're interested in. And while you're reading it, you want to highlight all the questions that have to be answered. And you want to highlight just, with a yellow highlight marker, and all the materials that you want to include when you submit your grant. Because if you don't answer all the questions and you don't include all the material, you're not going to get that grant. So you want to just make sure that you have a meeting of the mind, what they like to fund and what you're looking for. Then next, you're going to start to write the grant. And to start out, you want to just brainstorm ideas of what it is that you're interested in, what you think you might be interested in. And then you want to write a summary statement. And that summary statement is going to help you get clarity. And how you would write your summary statement is you want to answer who you are, who will benefit your project, what your project is, what your plan is, and how much money that you're asking for. So you want to get that summary statement. You want it to be a 1-paragraph description: who, what, when, where, how much. And you need to focus. It's to help you to focus you and focus your idea, because clarity is key when you're writing a grant. Because if they don't understand what it is you're asking for, why, who it's for, they're not going to fund it. So clarity is the key. Then you're going to start writing your rough draft. You just want to get your ideas on paper, and don't worry about it. You can always polish it up later. So just get your ideas written down. So those would be my first two: summary statement, and just get a rough draft, get your ideas written down.
Yeah, I imagine that the people that are reading these grants on the other end, as you talk, I keep thinking of when people apply for jobs, and I've got 20 resumes in front of me, 20 cover letters in front of me. I'm not going to go in and meticulously analyze every single word they say. I skim it first. I look for keywords. So I think that clarity is really important, making sure you're putting the words that they're looking for into your summary statement, into your rough draft, so that, if they're looking for environmental art, you've got the word environmental in there lots of times, or variations of that. So that clarity, I think, is important.
And you want to be able to state your needs, because the granting organization, they want to know what the problem is that you're looking to solve, and they want to know how they're going to help you. So you want to be able to state what your needs are so they can understand that, and document what your student struggles are. So do your students not have any technology, and they're having, you think that that's important for them? You want to be able to put together a plan for how you'll use the money that they give you and the materials that you'll be getting, that you can boost boost their skills in that area of technology or whatever it is, whatever area you're focusing on. So you want to document what it is, what your student struggles are, and how they can help you. So summary statement, rough draft, document your student struggles. And while you're writing, you want to continually assess to make sure that you're addressing what their purpose is. And again, if their purpose is technology or their purpose is environmental art, while you're writing, you want to continually assess what you're writing to make sure that those two meet. Again, a meeting of the minds. So, and let me see what else you want to really focus on the parts of the project that they'll like best. And again, it's just reflect what their purpose is. Is it STEAM? Is it ELL? Project-based learning? So know what they're interested in and make sure you match that. And you want to lay out your specific goals. The clearer your goals are, the better, because it will give them an understanding as they're reading your proposal. And it will give them an understanding of where their money's going, because they want to make sure their money's going to what their purpose is.
Yeah.
So I can just kind of sum it up. Your two goals as you're writing: you want to achieve clarity of your plan, and you want to be able to assess if you're contributing to their purpose.
Awesome. So what else is involved in writing a grant proposal?
All right. So next, some grants require that you have a letter of support, but not all of them do require that. But if they do, you don't want to leave that to the very last minute and have that an afterthought, because those letters of support will make you more competitive, because there's probably going to be other people that are applying for this grant. And actually, usually the bigger the grant, the more times they are going to ask for a letter of support. So one grant that I applied to, it was to go to Japan. It was a Fulbright to go to Japan for about a month. And chances were that I would have to be out of school for a month because it wasn't in the summer. So I had to go to my superintendent to get a letter of support from him. And because he had to, give me that, because they were going to probably have to provide a substitute for me while I was away in Japan. So I had to go to him. Another grant, it was a state grant. I had to get a letter of support from my principal. And I had to talk to him and let him know what the grant was about, and he had to agree with it. So I had to get that from him. And it just, when you have that letter of support, it just demonstrates my agreement that I'll follow through with everything involved in the grant, and I'll follow through with the project. And it's just basically a reflection of my commitment to the project. And my tip for that is, if you do have to get a letter of support, just make sure it's on your school letterhead. And again, not all granting organizations require this, but you may have to think about that. And just don't leave it to the end. Just make sure you get that up front. You don't want to have to go through the whole process. And, my superintendent could have said, no, I'm not going to sign this. I don't want to pay for a sub while you're you're traveling through Japan for a month.
Yep. But he was supportive.
Oh, yes. And actually, when I got to Japan, there were a few, it was more than just me. It was a few teachers. One of the teachers said afterwards, her superintendent, she got it, and he kind of gave her a hard time about it. And she's like,
No, you wrote the letter. I would think that a lot of administrators would want to celebrate that and showcase it. And, tell the community about it.
Yeah, I was so thankful. And I did, part of my follow-up with that is I had to bring the Japanese art into the community. So it was a win-win all around for everybody.
And you got to spend a month in Japan. That's amazing. I love that. I will refrain from asking you all about your trip to Japan because we're talking about grants, but that's exciting. So do you think that, I know that when I've had to write letters of recommendation for people in the past, or when I've asked people to write letters of recommendation for me, I've often given them like an outline or some bullet points of things to include. Have you ever done anything like that to help them write the best letter possible?
Oh, yeah. I would let them know what the grant was going to be about, and he had to go along with it. So,
yeah.
So
anything else involved in the actual application and the proposal before we talk about sort of what you do when you get the grant?
Yeah, well, I can just give you an example of clarity and being too vague.
Okay, that'd be great.
Because it's very important. As I said, clarity is key, and that's something I want to emphasize over and over again. So when you're writing a grant, you don't want to just say, I want to get this grant to help my second graders out or my third graders, because there's no clarity. Nobody knows what you're going to do with that money. And a granting organization just doesn't want to give you money if they're not going to know where the money's going to, who is it going to help. So you want to be specific and say something like, we will be using the $800 in the grant money to buy 2 new iPads to help my second grade art class. The iPads will be used to create videos on the Do Ink green screen app. So they know what it's going to be used for. They're going to know how much money they'll be using, who it's for. So again, I know I've said it often, but the clarity is gosh, I'm skipping over my words. Clarity
No, it's fine.
is key because they want to know that their money is going for what they want it to go for. It's going to help people. So
I can imagine you want to really paint a picture of what your classroom looks like, what your students are like, what this lesson or resources will be like, and how the money will impact it. Do you use a lot of storytelling in your grant writing at all? Is it more information or descriptive?
Well, you don't want to be really fancy in your wording. You want to be very plain. So,
Okay.
well, I can tell you when I wrote the grant for the Fulbright, I wanted it to be, again, as clear as possible. So my way of assessing it is that I divided it into 3 portions so it was easier for them to understand. I was going to be vocal, and that meant that I was going to give the lessons to the children and explain it using my voice. And then I was going to be visual. I was going to create displays that I was going to be putting up in banks and around the community. And I was going to use my knowledge that I've learned in Japan on technology. So I broke it down into 3 separate parts just to make it easier for them to understand what I was going to do. So I was going to take my knowledge of Japanese art. I was going to use my voice. I was going to use visuals, and I was going to use technology. So that's what I mean, that you don't want to use fancy words. So they could understand, okay, she's going to speak about Japan. She's going to use visuals of Japanese art. She's going to use visuals in technology. So I can't really say I use storytelling because, I think storytelling is a great way to get people to understand something. But for writing a grant, I just don't think, I don't know. I just think it was clearer. The clearer you are to make it, I don't know, the story.
Okay. Okay. That's just my own personal question. I think that that's a really good point, though, because just, it sounds like just adding as much detail as possible while keeping it really easy to understand is an important point. So you usually have to write an essay. Is there any particular length, or is it vary per grant?
Oh, well, when you are looking at a grant and deciding if you want to apply for it, they will give you a length of how long it can be. They might say, 300 words or less, or they'll give you the requirements, and you have to make sure that you follow those requirements. I mean, if they ask for a budget, if they ask for a length, what your assessment is going to be, describe it. So you have to make sure that you read the grant and you follow through. I missed out on getting about $2,000 extra this year for some money for my school this year because I just assumed, because I've gotten this money for the past few years, and I just assume, I'll do, what I did the last time, and I didn't read it correctly, and I did the wrong thing, and I sent it in, and then I have a relationship with them, so I email back and forth, and they're like, sorry, but that's not what you were supposed to do this time. You were supposed to do this. And so I missed out on $2,000 this year. It's like, oh, shoot, I didn't follow my own advice. So you really have to, follow what the requirements are. And if they have a requirement for words, and now the grants are all online, they'll just block you out. You can't, as soon as you type in that one letter over, you're done. So you have to go back and rewrite it to make sure it's within the amount of words they say.
So you mentioned when you were talking just now about an assessment. So what kind of processes or once you've gotten the grant, what do the grantors usually require of you as far as assessment and documentation?
Well, some granting organizations, they do require this, but not all of them do. Again, you have to read the grant to make sure what they require, and some of them do. The granting organization, they need to know where that their money is doing good in the community. They want to know what their impact is in the community. And this assessment or evaluation is usually submitted after the project is completed. So you need to know the timeline, because they will say, 2 weeks after your project's done or a month after your project's done, we need to know the assessment. So, and you need to know what the assessment is beforehand, before you put your application is in. So your assessment, there can be a multiple of things you can do for your assessment. It can be, I've had one grant, I had to put in a portfolio of photos. It could be a written statement. I have done that, or it could be a record of data showing that there has been improvement in the student. So it all depends. And again, sometimes you could create your own assessment. They don't require a special thing. I just had to put in a portfolio one time, and I got to decide what went into the portfolio. Another grant that I've gotten in the past, it has to be a written statement, and you submit it and you share your assessment, and it's just to basically show the impact that their money has made on the children. And some of the organizations, they might like to share their assessments online, and sometimes that's great, because when you're writing a grant, you're like, oh, what should I do? What should be my project to do? And you can look up and see some assessments that other people have put for their grants that they've gotten with granting organizations, and you can see what they've done, and it might spark an idea in you. Oh, well, maybe I could do something similar to that, or tweak that idea. So you can actually look up online and see what some organizations have used for assessments. So you can get ideas that way.
Yeah. Is it the bigger the grant, the bigger the requirements after? Have you seen that to be true?
Yes. Yeah. And when I did the Fulbright, I gave them my a portfolio, and they actually share that with other teachers who go through the Fulbright program, so they can see what other teachers have done before, and that's really great too. So I made a copy of the portfolio for myself because I wanted to save those memories, but I gave a portfolio to them also. So it all depends. And yeah, the bigger grants require a bigger assessment type of thing.
Yeah. So I know that a lot of teachers are scared of grants because of all the extra work involved. They might not be confident in their writing skills, or, teachers are already so bogged down. What are some of the ways to make this process easier?
Well, my first tip would be, after you've written your grant, to read it and read it again and read it again. You can read it aloud, because you want to hear how it's going to flow, because you want to be able to, you may think it sounds great, but when you read it out loud, it's like, oh, I could tweak that a little bit. So read it out loud to make sure how it flows, because if it doesn't flow for you, it's not going to flow for the person who's reading it. And if it's not clear to you, it's not going to be clear to them. My other advice, if you're starting out, I think I said this earlier, is start with the smaller grants, and less stress, less competition. You're more likely to get the grant because there's less competition. So start small, and that would be another advice.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can imagine that a lot of teachers don't apply for grants because of that fear of, all the extra work. And so I know that happened when I was teaching at Dallas ISD. There was something that we could just apply for. It maybe took me 20 minutes to do the application. And everybody who just submitted the application, I think we got, I don't remember how much it was, but it was like $600 or so. It wasn't very much money, but it was a good amount of money. And it was a 15-minute application, but so many teachers saw it and they're like, oh, I can't do another app. I can't do this. And then when everybody got this money, they were just punching themselves. I think, not be afraid to just.
Yeah, there's one grant that it's a state grant, and I think the deadline is October 1st to get it put in. And, like the first month of school is so crazy. And it's like, oh, should I put in for this? Or like, it's going to take away so much time because it's the beginning of the year. I'm just getting used to the kids and there's so much. And it's so set deadlines for yourself and just work on it a little bit at a time. Don't just think, oh, I got to sit down and like give up my whole weekend for writing this grant to get it in by October 1st. So set small deadlines for yourself and, I'll do this day and I'll do this, in a couple of days, I'll do this. So that's the way I work. And it's a way that works best for me. I'm not the type of person to just, I'll do it in one shot. I like to time myself and give me time to work up to it.
So what else is involved in this application? What's next?
Okay, great. So next you have to submit your application for the grant. And you have to make sure, you have to ask yourself, did I follow all the rules, all the procedures, all the deadlines that have to be followed? And that goes back, I think I said at the very beginning, as you're reading the grant, make sure you highlight everything, the materials you have to have, anything that's important, so you can check to make sure that you have met all those little things you highlighted in that grant. Again, you want to make sure it's clear, you want to make sure it's concise, and do your last steps to polish it up. You could make sure you check all the spelling, check all the grammar. You can have somebody else read it for you. You want to just make sure you check the flow, that it flows right when somebody reads it. And again, they will not fund what they can't comprehend, and things that you take for granted. I mean, we have our, when you're with a bunch of teachers together and you're talking about stuff, we all have the same language. They might not have that same language. So you want to make sure that they're going to be able to comprehend it. And you just follow all the timelines. And then you can just send it in, snail mail. I don't even know if any grants do snail mail anymore, or just send it in by email.
And don't forget to check your email regularly after you submit it. My husband got a scholarship one time. It was like $1,000. He didn't see the email, and then time passed and he didn't end up getting it because he just.
Oh my goodness! Yeah.
So make sure you got your email.
Too.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I wanted to say that before you submit it, make a copy of the proposal, because and just keep it in a little folder, because that could be useful to you and valuable to you for future reference when you're making another proposal down the line. And before, I don't want to forget to talk about budget too, because the budget is very important when you're putting in when you're submitting a grant. You don't want to guess at any of the numbers. You want to do your research on the actual expenses, because the person who's reading it, they're not going to do the research. If you're asking for circuits for a project, they're not going to be going, looking in a Blick catalog to see how much those circuits cost. So you want to make sure that your numbers are believable. You want to make sure that your numbers are actual. And you can just link one application I was putting. I would just go to the catalog. I don't remember, one of the art education catalogs, and I just would link it to the application right online, so they could, while they're reading the budget, they could make sure that I'm not making up these numbers. They could just go into that link and see, oh, okay, so she was looking for glitter paint and this is how much the glitter paint costs, and that's what you put on the application. So you can just link those budget items that the catalogs put online. So, and you
That's a
just
great tip.
submit it and sit back and wait and see if you got it. So
that's wonderful. So I can imagine that once you've done one, a lot of the same copy that you've written for past grants can be reused for other grants. If you have to write a little bit about your school or, about your students, so you already have that already written. So it gets easier with each time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I'll have the numbers if somebody says I want to know what your free and reduced lunch is at your school. I can, the numbers, I can always check with the secretary at the school, but the numbers are going to be about the same. The population is going to be about the same. So, I can just go back, reference those numbers to make sure they're accurate and then put it in.
Awesome. So I think we've covered sort of the main parts of all of this. Can you think of any other tips or suggestions that we have not yet covered?
So you want to find the grant. You want to write the grant. You want to write your proposal. You want to, and if you need that letter of support, you want to get your assessment and your evaluation and then submit it. And then I do have like some tips and best practices for the listeners for those parts of submitting a grant. We'll go over some of those.
Sounds good.
So you want to do your homework. You research the Granting Foundation and you want to know what its mission is, because you don't want to waste your time if it's not compatible. So, and you want to start small. You want to start local, because every state has its own local grants. Every state has a Department of Environmental Management, and a lot of the departments of environmental management have grants part of them. And it's just you hooking up the art with something environmental. You could design a garden at your school and grow vegetables. So, my state is a small state. And like I said earlier, we have 2 family foundations that support education. And I'm sure other states would have that too. It's just looking it up. And I got a grant once from the Rhode Island Department of Health to have my students design a billboard on lead paint poisoning. So every state has a Department of Health. I don't know if every state Department of Health gives grants, but you could certainly find out. So.
Yeah.
And another tip is you don't have to get everything in one grant. You could combine 2 or 3 small grants to get supplies for your classroom. And when it comes to brainstorming ideas, I know that I spoke just a little bit at the beginning about brainstorming, but how do you do that? And my phrase for that is collaborate to win when you brainstorm. So seek a colleague at school to throw ideas around. And find a veteran grant writer in your school. And if you're a newbie starting out trying to do grants, just go and talk to them and pick their mind and get ideas. And also, if you're somebody who's been doing grants for a long time, you might want to talk to somebody who's a new teacher, because they might have, you can get some inspiration some new fresh ideas from the younger teachers. And when I was just starting out as a teacher, I went to an older, I shouldn't say older, a more seasoned teacher. And I told her, I'm gonna write this grant because I want to go to graduate school. And she gave me just some really good advice, and I'll pass it along. She said, when I was writing the grant, she said, don't write it how it's going to benefit me. If I could go to graduate school, write it on how it will benefit the students, and how me getting a master's degree is going to be better for the students and for my community. And that was just the best advice. And I always think of that before I write a grant. It's like, it's not all about me getting the money. It's for the kids. It's for my school. It's for my community. So I wanted to make sure I pass that along, because I was just starting out teaching, and I went to her and I got that
good. Yeah.
to go to the University of Tennessee, get my master's in art ed because of that. So,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Was the grant through the school, or was it just an outside
Yeah, it was
organization?
through my community. Yeah.
Wow. That's really awesome. I think that's
another thing I wanted to say about collaborating is ask your students for ideas, because you can just say, hey, what do you think our classroom needs? What does our art room really need? And they will throw out ideas, and it's like, oh yeah, maybe that's a good idea to write about.
I love it. That's great. Well, I think that's some really awesome advice to wrap up our interview. And so I'm going to ask you just a couple follow-up or final questions. And one of them is just, how can teachers connect with you online? Do you have any sort of public social media or website or anything?
I do. I am on Twitter at Art Inklings, ART_Inklings, INKLINGS. And I do have a blog, but it was a blog for when I was in when I taught middle school, and I really haven't added to it, but it's still up there and people still go onto it, and I still get messages from people from my blog. But
I love it.
So I don't know. Someday I should go back and continue. Once I went back to elementary, I didn't add to my blog. So, but that's why you inspire me, because you have your website and you, and I really appreciate your website. I enjoy it.
Thank you very much. And the final question that I ask everybody I interview is, what artwork changed your life?
Oh my gosh. I'll just tell you a story that I always tell the kids, and they are like, wow. When I was probably about 3 or 4 years old, because I couldn't even read. And my parents got me an art history book with all these pictures of all this art. And I just looked at that book, and I was looking through all the art, and just something just went into my heart. And I said, this is amazing. I want to do something with art in my life. And it made me become an art history nerd. And I started taking art classes as a young person, and I ended up becoming an art teacher. So it's not just one piece of art. It was just that book it was like an anthology of art. And I knew from 4 years old that I wanted to do something with art after looking in that book. So
I love that.
My parents passed away, and I was like, I want that book, and it's still in my bookshelf today. So
that's wonderful. I mean, it's just the smallest things that are there, and it's never. Every time I hear these stories, it's never anything that you can plan. It's just happens.
It planted a seed in my heart, and I knew from that forward I wanted to do something in my life with art. So
that's wonderful. Do you have a favorite artwork or artist?
Oh gosh, I love them all. My favorite, I will say I love children's book illustrations, and there is an artist by the name of Kai Nielsen, who was a children's book illustrator, and he did the if you ever watch Walt Disney's Fantasia, he did the night at Bald. I think it's called The Night at Bald Mountain. So he did a few things. He did book illustrations, and he did work with Walt Disney. Kai Nielsen.
Wonderful. We'll put a link to some of his. It's a he.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We'll put a link to some of his art in the show notes for y'all to check out, because I just Googled it as you were talking, and it's pretty cool. I've never seen his work before, and it looks amazing. So thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today with our listeners. I know that there was a lot there that they can take and use when they get their first grant.
So my last thing, don't give up in writing grants. Even if you get rejection, don't give up. Use it as a learning experience.
Oh, another question, which is, I don't want to continue the interview, but can they, like, if you don't get it, can you reply back and ask why? Will they tell you?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was my other tip, is try to get a relationship with the people at the granting organization. Like I can call up a few of them and ask questions. And yes, definitely try to develop a relationship with them, email or call.
Okay, good. Little last tip for you. Thank you again so much. This was great.
Thank you for having me, Cindy. I've enjoyed it.
If your art appreciation classes were anything like mine, they happened in dark rooms with endless slides and boring lectures. Art in the dark. But art appreciation doesn't have to turn into nap time for your students. Start connecting your students to art with powerful class discussions. It can be intimidating to start talking about art with students, so teachers always want to know what they should say. The real question is what you should ask. You can get 82 questions to ask about almost any work of art for free on the Art Class Curator blog. The free download includes the list of questions, plus cards that you can cut out and laminate to use again and again. These versatile questions can be used in everything from bell ringers to group activities to critiques. Just go to artclasscurator.com/questions to get your free copy today. Thank you so much for listening to the Art Class Curator podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us an honest rating on iTunes to help other teachers find us and hear these amazing art conversations and art teacher insights. Be sure to tune in next week for more art inspiration and curated conversations.